Most of us spend a lot of time looking outside of ourselves for answers that were always going to have to come from within. Be your own fucking guru. That's what this series is about. I'm Ryan Paul McGuigan, and this is Beneath the Noise. At the end of the last episode, I said that even with the shift in the practice, even with the clarity and the restored self-belief, that there was still a real decision to make. And there was still an easier option. Staying. Belfast was familiar. Family and friends were nearby. I knew how things worked. Portugal meant going to a country where I knew nobody. No social circle, no support network. An apartment I could only book for 5 weeks in an area I'd only seen online. And with no guarantee that any of it would work out. And I want to stay on that for a minute because I think it matters. Because there's a version of that story that sounds like the natural next step. Like once the shift had happened and the vision was clear, that it was just going to automatically be the thing to do. And that's not totally true. And I'm not going to pretend that it is. The shift in the practice completely changed how I was seeing myself and my situation. Then separately, it solidified the vision and reinforced the conviction that it was possible for me. What it didn't do was make the decision for me. It didn't remove the fear. It didn't remove the risk. And it didn't remove the cost. And there was a real cost. I felt a certain amount of guilt. My dad was still living in my hometown. My granny, in her mid-80s, was still only down the road from there. And there was still a sizable group of my extended family and friends there. Going meant not being around the corner from them anymore. And I want to name that honestly. The cost was real, and I felt it. It wasn't all just big, beautiful businesses and beaches. But I went. And the reason that matters, and the reason this episode exists, is that the gap between knowing and doing is where most people stay. They know what needs to change, or at the very least that something has to change. They've thought it through, fantasized even. But because knowing and doing are two different things, and closing that gap takes something that most people aren't expecting or accounting for. And there's a distinction I want to make here before we go any further. There's a difference between the circumstances that shaped you and brought you here and the choices you make from here going forward. The first part isn't your fault. What happened to you? All that stuff that goes on mostly subconsciously that we've discussed in the previous episodes. You know, the roles you get cast in, the expectations you absorbed, the things that eroded imperceptibly over years, without any particular moment you can point to. None of that is on you. That's the stuff the first 7 episodes of this series have been about. But the second part, what you do from here, well, that's entirely yours. And I want to be clear about that and what I mean. Because responsibility and blame are two completely different things. And people often treat them as the same. Blame looks backward. It says, you caused this, and so it's your fault. That's not what I'm saying here. Most people are here due to things which are not even conscious to them. Plus, blame isn't useful here. Guilt isn't useful here. Then responsibility, on the other hand, looks forward. It says, regardless of how you got here, you're the only person who can move you forward from here. Nobody else can make that decision for you. Nobody else can take the action. Nobody else can live your life. That's not a burden, or it doesn't have to be. It's actually the most empowering thing I can say to anyone who's been stuck. There's a particular thing people say when they're in this place that I want to address directly. I don't have a choice. And I understand why it feels that way. I genuinely do. But because in the immediate, practical, short-term sense, it can be true. You can't always walk out of the job you hate tomorrow. You can't always leave a place or a relationship without real consequences that need to be managed first. Real constraints exist, and I'd be doing you a disservice to pretend otherwise. But staying is also a choice. Every day you remain in a situation you know isn't right for you, you're choosing it. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with enthusiasm, but choosing it nonetheless. What we aren't changing, we're choosing. And more importantly, the thing that constrains you from acting immediately almost never constrains you from looking honestly at what's there. Most people who say they have no choice haven't yet let themselves fully acknowledge what they actually want or what's important to them. There's something sitting underneath that acknowledgement that feels risky. The belief that if they admitted what they truly wanted, they couldn't have it, and they'll only be disappointed. So it feels safer just not to look. If you never fully see and acknowledge the gap, you never have to face the possibility of not being able to cross it. And I understand that too. I lived it for years. And there's another version of this though, and it's worth naming separately. The people who aren't holding back because they're afraid to look, it's that when they look, they find blankness. After years of performing what's expected, following the path that they felt they should, doing what made sense on paper, they've lost reliable contact with what they actually feel. The question, what do I really want, doesn't produce a clear answer. That can be confusing. It can be scary. It throws up a whole pile of other questions, and there's no clear path forward. And that feels like reason enough to stop looking. Both of those, the fear of seeing clearly and the genuine inability to see clearly at all, end up in the same place. A life continued by default rather than by design. The cost of that is worth naming because most people significantly underestimate it. It's rarely a single crisis. It accumulates. Another year in a role that drains you, justified by the salary or the security or the sense that leaving now would be irresponsible. A relationship or a place or a way of living that stopped fitting a long time ago, but that you've stayed in because changing it felt too much, too risky, too disruptive to the people around you. It looks like waiting for the right moment, for the finances to get better, for the children to be older, for some external conditions to shift before you give yourself permission to start moving. And the waiting feels responsible, necessary even. It often looks responsible from the outside, but underneath, it's the quiet handing over of the one thing only you can do for yourself. Nobody else can decide your life needs to change. Nobody else can make your choices that move you towards something more aligned. And every year that passes without that happening, it's a year that's gone. The people who are most stuck tend to be the people who've also gotten very good at convincing themselves that they're not. So what does taking responsibility actually require? First, an honest assessment. Not one filtered through what seems reasonable, given your circumstances, or what other people around you would consider acceptable, or what you think you should want. A genuinely honest look at the significant areas of your life. Work, relationships, where you live, how you spend your time, whether any of it is actually working for you. Most people have never done this fully. They've done some version of it, softened by the need to justify where they are already. Second, and this is the one most people underestimate the most, courage. But not the dramatic kind. Not some sudden, reckless, or reactive decision to blow everything up. That has never been the case for the people I've worked with so far. I mean the quiet, sustained kind of courage that says, I can see that this needs to change. I don't know exactly how, but I'm going to move towards it anyway. The courage to acknowledge what's true for you before you have a plan. The courage to sit with the discomfort of knowing the gap exists before you know how to cross it. and the courage to begin before you feel ready. Because the feeling of readiness almost never comes first. It tends to come after the first move, not before it. And third, the willingness to accept that real change has real costs. My cost was proximity to my dad and my granny. I named it because it was real and because softening it would have made the whole thing look easier than it really was. Every person's costs are different, but the principle holds. You rarely get to move toward the life you actually want without leaving something behind. That's not a reason to stay put. It's just an honest accounting of what's involved. And the way I look at it is that there'll be a cost for staying and a cost for going. Choose your cost consciously. And here's where I want to bring this back to you and to what comes next in the series. Everything I've described in this episode, the honest assessment, the willingness to look clearly at what's actually there, the acknowledgement of what isn't working and what you might genuinely want instead, all of that is the preparation for what comes next. Episode 9 is different from every other episode in this series. It's a guided practice. And unlike the rest of this, it's not something to listen to passively. It's deliberate. It has a specific focus and a specific outcome in mind. The way you arrive into it matters. So, spoiler alert, if you love to multitask while listening to your podcasts, to really appreciate the next episode, you won't be able to do that. So no driving, no working out, no cleaning the house. Give yourself permission to carve out 30 minutes of dedicated time for the next episode. And I have a little homework for you to do in between. So don't blast on through to the next episode without doing the following. Before you listen to that episode, I'd like you to take a moment and think about this. What's the question your analytical mind has been circling without landing? Not a general sense that something's off. A specific question. Something you've come back to repeatedly that keeps surfacing in the quiet moments that you haven't been able to resolve through more thinking about it. It might be about your work, whether you're in the right role or the right field, or doing something that would mean more to you. It might be about a relationship or where you live, or something that you've been holding back on or procrastinating about. Whatever it is for you, that's what you're bringing into the practice. Something important that you want clarity about. And if you're not sure what the focus is, or if when you look for it, you find that blankness or confusion I described earlier, the session guide will help you with that as well. The link to it is in the description of the next episode. It's a practical guide that covers how to set up your environment for the practice, what to have to hand before you sit down, how to identify and set your focus if that isn't immediately clear already, and a journaling guide for after to capture what comes up. It takes less than 10 minutes to read through. The reason it exists is that this practice is intentional. When you arrive prepared with a genuine focus, something real becomes possible. When you arrive without one, you're shortchanging yourself before you've even started. So click the link, work through it, and then come to episode 9 to listen beneath the noise. Thanks for listening to Beneath the Noise. If something in this landed for you, pass it on to someone you think could use it. And the next episode is there when you're ready.